This could be the shortest meeting ever because of the 3 papers. Martin can't make it today because of a family funeral memorial service, so he sends his apologies. He was going to be talking about child and bearing gold, of course, and so we'll fit him in one of our meetings quite soon. And as those of you who've been here for a while will gather, we just phoned up Margaret to find out if Margaret's coming, and apparently she is. So we do have 2 papers for you. We have Catherine Ann Cullen first, and then Margaret Bennett. So the parish notice is, as we've said before, the next meetings, the next 2 meetings will be in this series of papers that we gave at the American Folklore Society conference last year. So it's 8th of February, 8th of March. Those are our 2 next Zoom meetings. Then we have our Broadside Day in Sheffield on the 14th of February. And our spring conference in Manchester, that's the one Women and Folk Song, on the 18th of April. And the call for papers is just closed for that, so we will know quite soon who's on the roster, and it looks like it's going to be a really good day. So go to the website and find the details of our future meetings, please. At our next Zoom meeting, that's the 8th of February, we're going to have our AGM. So we start half hour early. We start at 3:30. Technically, only for members of the TSF, but we don't check people's credentials at the door, so anybody's welcome to come. But it's just a quick half-hour business meeting to tell you about the finances, and you all know the plans for the future, that sort of stuff. So that's the 8th of Feb. We'll start half an hour early for our Zoom meeting and have the AGM, and then have our usual 3 papers. So the other thing to know about, we told you about this before, but don't forget FDIS, Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, Folk England, whatever they're called, they've got their library lectures coming up. They're on Tuesdays, 13th of January, 10th of February, 10th of March, and 14th of April. And 3 of the speakers, Elizabeth Bennett, Sue Allen, Vic Gammon, are all TSF members as well. So I think you'll find all 4 papers, in fact, will be of great interest. So go to the EFDSS website to book for the library lectures. And then one other thing to mention, don't forget that we've put out an appeal for the Friends of the TSF. In other words, those of you who would like to support us with a donation, as small or as large as you like. We don't, as you know, we don't charge membership. We very rarely charge for meetings. We don't charge for Zoom meetings. And we can only do that because some people support us financially, and we're very grateful, but we could always do with some more. So please do go to the website if you want to send us some money. I think those are all the notices. As I said, Martin has sent his apologies, so we're going to start with Catherine, and I won't try to pronounce the words that she's going to be talking about because that's half the point, really. So over to you, Catherine, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thanks, Steve, and hi, everyone. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Can everybody see that okay?
We have that. Yes, that's perfect.
And you can hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Great. So, the title of my presentation is Nabocklish, Shandrydan and Wirristhru, Hiberno-English words in 19th century Dublin street ballads and music-saloon songs. So I'll start with my own definition of Hiberno-English, which kind of draws on a few of the other, a few of the books here. So basically it's English, sorry, I've gone ahead of myself. Basically it's English spoken as it is spoken and written in Ireland. In vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar, it's influenced by the Irish language, or Gaeilge as we call it here. And as well as using Irish words, it preserves some archaic English words as well. And in written form, it tends to be anglicised spelling of Irish words, such as Colleen, Colleen, for the Irish Colleen, which is spelled differently, and galore for the Irish galore, or plenty. Enough. So I'm going to concentrate on words from the Irish language that are found in 19th century ballads of two subjects of my studies, the Dublin street poet and balladeer Joseph Sadler and the Dublin tavern singer James Kearney. And both of them flourished around the middle of the 19th century. So I'm going to start with Joseph Sadler, who's born in a Dublin tenement in 1820. It's almost unprecedented to have a portrait of a 19th century street singer from Dublin, but this is one I've identified in the National Library of Ireland. And in it, Sadler is seen plying his other trade, that of a newspaper seller. He lived for much of his life around Barrack Street in Dublin, a poor street that led up to the Royal Barracks. And he was a news balladeer who supplied Dubliners with political and criminal news in his songs. So his home near the barracks may have contributed to his propensity for writing songs about soldiers. One such song is variously called the Militia Boy Discharged, or the Poor Militia Boy. And I'm choosing to open with the word wirrusthru, which occurs in this song. It's a kind of an exclamation which is used in a similar way to alas, or woe is me. The song is to the air of Stephen Foster's O Susanna, and that song dates from 1848 and was clearly so popular that a derivative song called Your Honour, Don't Cry is given as the air of on one of the broadsheets here, as you can see on the right-hand side there. This likely dates the song from the Crimean War, which ended in 1856, with many soldiers left wounded and destitute on the streets of Dublin, and I'm sure of cities that you know as well. So this song starts, you lads and lasses, great and small, pay attention to my song. It is well worth your notice and it won't delay you long. I'm a poor discharged militia boy, I mean to let you know. And since they have gave me the bag, I know not where to go. So there's various different versions, but all of them seem to have this verse. Oh, your honour, if I could get employ, for goodness sake now won't you help a poor militia boy? And the song ends with the threat of the poorhouse hanging over the soldier. My regimentals once so gay, I'm forced for to resign. My polished boots, my gloves and can I sold to raise the wind. If I'm not called up in haste, oh, wirrusthru, I'll cry. Then quick march to the poorhouse goes the poor militia boy. So a reminiscence in a Dublin newspaper in 1915 by a music hall journalist tells us that Sadler had also written a song about Mormon leader Brigham Young, which also features the word. Brigham Young was a popular subject for songs, mainly due to a fascination with the number of wives Mormons were allowed to have. And the song that's referred to in the newspaper articles is possibly this one, which was, I think, published in Dublin and held at the National Library of Scotland. It's called The Mormon Widow's Lament for the Loss of their husband Brigham Young. And here the word wirrusthru is given more prominence. It occurs in the first line, you Mormon knights, both one and all, wirrusthru, in doleful strains on you I call, to lament for Brigham Young. And it uses the same Hiberno-English word wirrusthru in the first line of each subsequent verse, with lines such as, now really it is a sorrowful sight, wirrusthru, and now 170 kids and more, wirrusthru. So the lyrics are less than flattering to Young, suggesting that he may not have been admitted through the pearly gates. So I hope nobody is offended by that. The song is dated from 1877, based on the fact that Young died in August of that year. And if so, it's Sadler's last recorded composition. He was still on the street selling newspapers in the late 1870s, and he died in 1890. Wirrusthru must have been a popular word in 19th century Dublin, as it also appears in the tavern songs of James Kearney, some of which made their way onto the streets as broadside ballads, and also sold behind the bars where he worked. Here it is in the Riches of Ireland. In 2 different printings, there were many more. This one was likely printed by Peter Brereton in Dublin, the one that I've made bigger here, who was known for his high number of typos. The song is a patriotic one, more or less decrying the use of wirrusthru in relation to Ireland at all. So it begins, I've often heard big Englishmen, I and great Irishmen will call it too, while speaking of the emerald sod, say poor old Ireland, wirrusthru. But then it goes on to say, oh, we shouldn't be saying that about Ireland, it's such a great place, and we shouldn't be lamenting it at all. So all 3 songs I've referenced here have different spellings for wirrusthru, as befits a word whose pronunciation in Irish is being approximated into the English language. So let's have a look at what Terry Dolan says about the word in his Dictionary of Hiberno-English, which I think was first published in 98 and has been reprinted quite a lot. It's a very popular book here. So he tells us that wirrusthru is a rendering of the Irish A Mhuire is trua, or Mary, it's a pity. And he has virgin in brackets so that we know that he's talking about the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. To give a little more context, the usual word for Mary in Irish is Mhuire, which you've probably heard in various anglicizations as Moira with a Y or with a OI or with an AU in the middle. But the biblical Mary in Irish gets a different name all to herself, Mhuire. Irish nouns, like Latin nouns, if you know your ad silvams and all those kind of things in Latin, they're case sensitive. So if you address Mary or Mhuire in the vocative case, it's A Mhuire. So the sound changes to a W sound, and in some parts of Ireland to a V sound, A Mhuire. You can see that neither the Kearney nor the Sadler versions of the word are exactly reproduced here. The Kearney ones is the closest. I have them down here at the bottom, but he divides the words into 2, whereas Dolan uses only single words for his various renditions of wirrusthru here. There's another intriguing word in a Sadler song about a local election in Dublin in 1870. The song hasn't survived as a broadsheet, but it's fortuitously contained in a letter that was published in a Dublin newspaper, the Freeman's Journal, in August 1870. An anonymous correspondent from Dublin's south suburbs describes the treatment of Sadler at the hands of the police in a letter to the paper, and the letter includes the entire text of a satirical song called The Orange Repealers. The letter writer says, as I've said up here, last night on my way home, I stopped a while at the corner of Ash Street to hear Joe Sadler's sweet baritone give out a stave on the coming election, when 2 ruthless helmeted Janissaries of the law rushed upon our latest bard. So the police were objecting to the political nature of the song, which lampooned one of the candidates. This was Edward King Harman, a Protestant advocate for Home Rule in Ireland. The song reflects poor Catholic Irish suspicion of such wealthy Protestants who were campaigning in this period for Home Rule, that is, the restoration of the Dublin-based Parliament, which had been abolished in the 1801 Act of Union in favour of direct rule from London. So the song satirises the so-called Orange Men who are seeking reform and suggests that they will soon be attending Mass and celebrating the rebel dead like true Catholics. This kind of thought was to completely ignore a long history of Protestants who were to the forefront of campaigns for Irish independence, but never let the truth get in the way of a good song, which opens with a list of unlikely events. Well, have I got the right one there? So anyway, sorry. Yeah, you mightn't be able to see it there, but it is. The opening is, hurrah, me boys, we're getting repaled. 'Twill soon be at our doors, sir. The praties never again will fail, and we'll never have any more poor, sir. Hurrah for the Pope and Granuaile, Green Aaron, you are charming. We'll have the boy that'll get the repale, that bold young Celt, King Harman. So the word I want to talk about here is Shandrydan, which occurs in a verse about Major Knox, or Lawrence Knox, the founder of the Unionist Irish Times newspaper, which still exists, possibly not quite as Unionist as it was in those days. The verse is, Major Knox will search Connemara's land for the convert congregations and bring them all up in his Shandrydan to give us our educations. So Sadler uses the word Shandrydan for the vehicle in which people will be brought, converts to Protestantism, will be brought to Dublin to be re-educated, presumably back to Catholicism. To me, the word is clearly of Irish derivation, Shan being the English rendering of the Irish word Shan, old, S-E-A-N, as opposed to Sean, which has a father or an accent on the A to give that aw sound. Shan is found in many place names in Ireland, Shankill, the old church, and in many phrases, including the Shan Van Vuchter, the poor old woman, often used as a symbol for Ireland. Another clue to the Irishness of the words is the H's, the H here, or the H as you would say, in England probably. We say H in Ireland, and I've illustrated that in the case of Mhuire and A Mhuire. So the H is used, to show a different case in Irish. The second part of the word, though, is more of a mystery to an Irish speaker. We don't really know where it comes from. It may be from the Irish derrida, which means seclusion, so referring to the kind of secluded nature of a little carriage, or to the word dordawn, which means buzzing in Irish, kind of a buzzing or a humming sound to sort of suggest the rickety carriage. But it might also come from the Irish word dray, which is related to the English word dray, as in a horse and dray, a cart. With the dan bit added at the end, partly to rhyme with shan and to give a nice kind of bouncy onomatic sound to the word. What's clear is that in this case, even though the word has come down to us clearly from Irish, I would say, we can no longer connect it to the original as clearly as we'd like. So the word has been anglicised in various ways, as Shandrydan, with the most commonly, as I've shown it here. And it is a puzzle for dictionaries in English too. The Oxford Dictionaries Online and several other sources give a definition but no etymology or origin, but Webster's 1913 dictionary goes one better by at least crediting the word as from Ireland at the end there. A report in an Irish newspaper of 1900, referring back to the 1840s, uses the same spelling as Sadler did in a piece that refers to the British writer Thackeray. Conditions have altered very materially since Thackeray left Cork in a Shandrydan of a coach for Killarney nearly 60 years ago. What would the great novelist have thought then, had he been told that it would have been possible to go to Killarney from Cork on a Saturday by first-class rail, stay in one of the finest hotels, enjoy the best fare, and return to Cork in a first-class carriage on Monday, all for £1 7 shillings and sixpence? So to answer this rather breathless question, I imagine Thackeray would not have been overly impressed. He was notoriously biased against Irish people and was one of the originators of the racist stereotypes of the Irish in Punch magazine, so I imagine he wouldn't have been that impressed by the first-class rail. Nabocklish also appears in... Oh, sorry, Nabocklish, have I... Yes, sorry, I've missed a thing. Here we go. Now, Nabocklish is another word that I'd like to talk about today, the third word. And it's another word that we find in both of the singers that I'm talking about, Sadler and Kearney. The word or phrase is a rendering into English spelling of the popular Irish phrase Nabocklish, or don't mind it, don't worry about it. Here it is in another soldier song from Sadler, also about the Crimean War and what he calls the Russian War. Sorry, I should not have done that. So he says, yes, the monster he'll wish he kept far away when in battle with Paddy, believe what I say. Nabocklish, me boys, do you never mind that. We'll double him in two like a big Norway rat. Apparently a big Norway rat is just an ordinary rat. I didn't realise they were supposed to come from Norway, but apparently they do. Sorry, I've slightly lost my place in my thing here. Here we go. Sorry. Okay, so interestingly, I think here Sadler gives an English translation of the Nabocklish in his song. So he says, you know, not as along with Nabocklish, he says, "Do you never mind that?" which means is basically the English translation of it. So I guess he's using that translation just to make sure that people understand the word, just in case they don't understand Nabocklish, that they're getting a rendition of it there. So Kearney also uses Nabocklish with the same spelling, but running the three words together, whereas Sadler separates them out. Kearney's song St. Kevin and King O'Toole tells the legend of how the king promised to bring how the saint promised to bring the king's dead gander back to life in return for the plot of land that the goose would then fly around. When the gander is revived and flies 30 miles around, however, the king goes back on his word and he brings his 6 sons to intimidate Kevin. So here's the last verse. The king to raise a ruction next, he called the saint a witch and sent in for his 6 big sons to heave him in the ditch. Nabocklish, said St. Kevin, I'll soon settle these young urchins. So he turned the king and his 6 sons into the 7 churches. That's one of the legends of St. Kevin. Joyce also used the word Nabocklish in Ulysses in the Cyclops episode, where the citizen, who's a rather pretentious man, is complimented on his previous prowess as a shot putter, and he's asked to describe his best throw, and he says Nabocklish. So don't worry about it. I'm not going to talk about it. When I gave this paper originally back in November, was it, or October, one of the questions was, I think from Steve, was, are there any other words beside these 3? Now, there are, of course, loads of other words. It's just I chose those 3 words because there was a lot maybe to talk about in them. They're kind of interesting and unusual words compared to ones that you probably would be familiar with, such as brogues and things like that. You probably know the word brogue as a shoe in Irish, and gob as in Irish. Gob is actually a beak, but it's used as a sort of a slang kind of word for mouth. So these words here are taken from an earlier article, probably I think the only other piece ever written by an academic about James Kearney, which was called Popular Speech in the Songs of James Kearney, which was written by Alf McLaughlin, published in 1961. He was director of the Irish National Library, the National Library of Ireland, and later university librarian in Galway. And his article deals not just with words from Irish, but also with slang words and cant words, but he divides them up. So he mostly just lists them and gives a little explanation. And I've actually put in the names of the songs here that he refers to, because he just gives the page numbers. But if anybody be interested in reading this article, I have a PDF of it and I can send it on afterwards. So these are some of the words that he goes through, and as you can see there, he does mention Nabocklish as well. Don't bother about it, and he uses the same song there. But he had much fewer songs of Kearney than I have today, because he was drawing them from 3 songbooks, 3 songsters, whereas nowadays I have access to all sorts of old songsters, little pamphlets and little chapbooks that Kearney songs appear in. So I probably have access to about 50 of them. So I'm doing better in quantity than McLaughlin did. So I just wanted to end with an occasion when I benefited greatly from a Hiberno-English phrase in a broadsheet. And that's here on the song, a new song on the O'Connell Monument, which was written about the foundation of laying the foundation stone for a statue of Daniel O'Connell, who was known as the Liberator in Ireland in 1862. And on this broadsheet is the intriguing information that the author is Joseph Sadler, my friend, a dark man. And this detail proved crucial to discovering more about Joseph Sadler. What did the printer mean by the phrase a dark man? It comes directly from the Irish. So Dineen's Folklore Gaelga Berla, or Irish English Dictionary, tells us that the Irish phrase Bar Durcha, which literally means a dark man, also means a blind man. And with the information that Sadler was blind, I was able to find mentions of him under the name Blind Sadler in a lot of newspapers and periodicals, which I mightn't have found otherwise. So thanks to a little Hiberno-English from a 19th century printer, I no longer had to cry wirrusthru at my lack of progress into my studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. As always, an excellent, interesting paper. Nabocklish, just, could we say that means whatever? Would
No
that be about?
backlash, yeah. I mean, people now often. I mean, this phrase is still used all the time by uh, at least by a lot of English speakers in Ireland. But they often just say Nabock. They shorten it to Nabock. Don't mind, don't worry.
Don't worry.
So yeah.
Do you want to unchair so that we can see
Thank you.
everybody?
Yes, I'll do that now.
Everybody's
Thanks for
faces.
reminding me.
Anybody who want to ask a question, raise your hand in the usual way by going down to react at the bottom there, because I can't see you all, so I can't see if you raise your hand. One thing I was going to, just a little thing, in the letter to the Freeman's Journal, was it? He refers to the sweet baritone of whichever singer he was talking about at the time.
Yes, Joseph Sadler.
Do you think that that's satirical, or do you really think that he might have had? Do other people say he had a sweet baritone?
It's very hard to know. Like, it's literally probably the only description we have of the sound of him. You know, it's very hard to hear the descriptions of people singing like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like to think it's true because I like to think he'd have a sweet baritone, but he was a rough, poor, very poor man. So maybe maybe it's slagging him off. Yeah, maybe it's satirical.
Yeah, I've never heard of another street singer being called sweet.
Yeah, I know. I shouldn't cling on to it as a hope, but I kind of do. I
Anybody
think
else? Sorry.
actually looking, Steve, as the tone of the rest of the letter, like saying that calling the policemen helmeted janissaries of the law, like, probably it is
Yeah,
satirical, all right.
maybe so. No, I didn't realize that galore came from Irish. I mean, that's a perfectly good English word as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, so that's
I
a word
don't
you
know.
hear in English all the time. So the Irish is go lower, which means enough, of enough of something, or it kind of has gone on then to mean, a lot, but really it means enough. I had enough of something. The galore gum. Yeah.
Fair enough. Anyone else? Anybody got any questions? Remember, we're one paper short because Martin's not here, so we got plenty of time.
I lost the place to put my hand up, but if I can come in on the galore, whiskey galore, as I say, it was the Scottish Gaelic galore,
Yes.
is enough. Of course,
Yes.
never enough. It's just whiskey galore, they say in English, but it's galore, they would say in Gaelic. So it's
Yeah,
the
I
same,
mean, it's more or less the same
other
language, really, let's face it. Yeah.
Well,
the other words have parallels as well, and words for an old shoe come in, not meaning an actual shoe, but sort of an insulting word, and baffle, broke, that kind of thing comes in Scottish. And sometimes the English word goes into Gaelic songs. It's there's quite a number of them. I grew up thinking they were English, but they weren't.
I think also it's an interesting thing that galore means enough in Irish and Scottish Gaelic, because having enough possibly in some places was a treat. Having enough was a lot. So you can understand how it migrated into meaning a lot.
Tina's got a hand up. Hi, Tina.
No. Yeah, I noticed in your list there was the word garçon.
Yes,
It's
that's an
French
interesting one.
garçon. And I just wondered if, obviously, somewhere they bypassed, obviously, sailors went around the world. If there were other words that came from France or other places that we know.
There are in Irish a few words. I mean, there's quite a few words because the Norman invasion 1190 we credit with when the Normans became more Irish than the Irish themselves, allegedly. We all learned that in school. They brought us certain words. I mean, the word for chambre is the word in Irish for a room, which clearly sounds like the French, more like the French chambre than the English, for instance, chamber, where I presume that I presume that also came from French. I'm not sure, but you can hear the pronunciation in Irish. It's definitely from the French. It's not from the English. So there's things like that. But garsoon or gossoon is it something? I mean, in Irish it's called garsoon, but it's often anglicized as gossoon. You hear that in songs or garsoon. So yeah, they're definitely from France, and there are quite a few. I write some poetry about words like that, and one of them is plomos, which is probably not a word you know, but it means a kind of flattery. It means a kind of soft flattery that you know somebody's plomosing me, they're kind of buttering me up, and the word comes from the French blancmange into Irish, which is a great word. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. There's another paper to be given on that, but
yes, blancmanging somebody, that sounds weird. That's great. Thank you, Catherine. As always, lovely paper. And our two papers that we do have without Martin stick together really nicely, because we're now going to go and talk about Gaelic songs in Scotland. So Margaret, would you like to share your screen? Don't forget you're muted at the moment.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. I will. And get the beginning of this share. And I must put it on a slideshow and hope to get that.
Yeah. Right, that's good.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't change my top tile. I left it the way it was at the AFS. And I may as well start it. Yes, okay. I thought I might add in a few pictures from places that I lived or grew up, and just in a way to convey the idea that those pictures in front of you, they are not really from the Dark Ages. That's the way these houses look like now. They've been done up, but in my school days, they were lived in. And so here we go. The index of the ballad titles in volume 5 does include the Celtic languages, 33 Breton references, 3 Gaelic, that's for both Scotland and Ireland, and 1 Welsh. But for me, it was a starting point, research on the ballads from the Celtic countries and an opportunity to search for child ballads. And actually, I should acknowledge Pete Shepherd, who's sitting out there, who sent me a rather mysteriously sounding version of Our Good Man, which I had heard actually in another version. So that brought these papers to mind, these songs to mind. Whereas I'd often read there was no, in fact, I'd heard it at lectures at the University of Edinburgh, there's no such equivalent in Scottish Gaelic, but it didn't seem quite right. And so I'm going to look at these 3 as a starting point. There may be more. So the Highlands, of course, in the islands, that's was much the scenery of my childhood. So I thought I would even introduce you to the people who taught me my songs. That's my mother and her father, who was recorded in 1908, shortly after Lucy Broadwood went to Arisig, and Marjorie Kennedy Fraser followed suit and recorded in that same family, and that's my grandmother. My father, on the other hand, a lowlander from Armagh originally, plenty of songs, but none in Gaelic. So that's the background. I grew up on the Isle of Skye and moved then to the island of Lewis and later to Shetland, all of them influencing my thoughts on song. That's the view from the door of the house that my mother was born and brought up in. You can no longer see the house. It's flattened. In my day, it was a stable. But the landscape is pretty well the same. And I want to turn to this man here, Reverend Alexander Stewart. Let me first have a little pause at Child's Volume 1, and the song is the Twa Sisters. He's got 19 versions, and some of them fit very well a paper that Archer Taylor wrote published in the Journal of American Folklore in 1929. In fact, I came across this as a student, and I did wonder at it because he was very, very clear about what he thought was Scots and what he thought was not. But on it goes. John Francis Campbell, writing in 1861, quotes one version from Lady Caroline Murray, who literally, if she was alive now, would be my next door neighbour here in Perthshire. So it's on the mainland Scotland. And this song, that the first one here, the Twa Sisters, we can find it in a book by this man here, the Reverend Alexander Stewart. He was from the Outer Hebrides, but he settled in Lochaber, and he had a pen in which he called himself, in an article he wrote, Nether Lochaber. He was born in 1821 and lived just till the 20th. So that's his parish. It's quite large, and the landscape emphasizes that even more. It's a huge area, and of course, very spread out settlements. The main economy in his day was still cattle driving, the droving trade down to the lowland markets. So there was a lot of going between places, and if the songs were carried by the drovers, so be it, or the fishermen on the coast, but so also by the travelling people. They would still see settlements like this in my own childhood. So that's a fair bit of background, how slow we were in catching up with civilization. But if I look in his book, twixt Ben Nevis and Glencoe, he talks about some songs. I think these pieces are published as articles in Inverness Courier. And in this one he said, it's many years since we became acquainted with an old and exceedingly interesting Gaelic song, for a complete and correct copy of which we had inquired and searched everywhere, but with different success. So far as we're aware, it's never appeared in print, nor, although most everybody knows the beautiful air and the argument of the story in its minutest details, it's easy to meet with anyone who can repeat more than 2 or 3 verses or the whole song. It's got no distinctive title or name, but it's best known by a single line, which indicates the keynote of the tragedy. Translated, pity the poor young woman, the one who drowned. And briefly, the story is this. A young woman, happily married and already the mother of 2 children, as one song itself relates, 2 years old and the other 3 months, invites her young unmarried sister to visit them. And in a short time, a criminal connection is formed between the husband and this young woman, his sister-in-law, a state of matters the poor wife knows nothing about. She's devoted to her children and, believing herself happy in her husband's love, has no suspicion. How could she possibly suspect? Asks the story of her own sister of such a wickedness. The guilty husband and his guilty paramour resolved to rid themselves of the deeply wronged and unsuspecting wife on the first favourable opportunity. This opportunity soon presents itself. One day, in the spring of the year, the low tide of the vernal equinox, the wife, leaving her children in the care of their sister, descends to the big shore in order to gather dulse and the rarer shellfish. To show you some dulse, pardon me. And the rarer shellfish that is common in the vernal equinox. And she ventures seawards as far as possible, fills her creel with shellfish, then directs her steps onto a skier, a rock in the sea at low tide, which is exposed and dry, but is usually covered by the tide, in order to gather dulse there. And that at the low tide is the sweetest. She sits down to rest. It's a warm, bright day, and she's tired with her exertions. Her head droops and turns on her side. She falls asleep. Her husband and sister, calling to her, get no answer, and they go to the Skeivara, the rock, and they find her. By the way, that's just for your own interest what we make with this dulse besides soup. Her head droops. They call to her, but she's sound asleep. Getting no answer, they weave and plait her hair into the abundant grass rack and tangles that grows abundantly in the convenient rocks just for this purpose. And a round shapely arm lays on her sleeper's, around the shapely arm on which the sleeper's cheek lies. Their evil work done, the man fled from the scene, but his accomplice, the sister, only removed to the opposite shore to watch this scene. So she watches, and the sister wakes, and she says to her, please help me, the tide is coming in, and she knows she can't move. But the sister shows her no mercy. She calls her loud in terrible distress, only to be jeered and laughed by the cruel sister, who advises her she has no pity on her and she will give her no help. And it's at this point that the song starts. I'm not going to do the one that's on the pages of the Reverend Stewart of Lochaber, but this is one that I heard in Skye. I was an adult when I heard it, and I can't remember who sang it. I think I was at some big gathering on a weekend, and it was very early 70s. So this is it. And it's very much, the text actually is parallels the one in print. So it goes like this, and it's got a chorus which laps in and out like the tide, as the tide does when it's going out and coming in. Goes out a bit and back a little bit, out a bit and back, and the chorus echoes that. Ikam pata huko, mohamara huko, bimahera rehudiyar, smorur raden huko, bimahera huko, smorur raden huko, shevat mishahudiyaro, I won't do the repeats, I'll just keep going. Mochata karamer huko, varum vaile huko, mochwalin down huriarko, troch kare huko, horsari buam huko, Gumofastjen huko, ferach beliam hurion, nach elatje huko, jörgen och huko, kieche vaher huko, Mhuire chanaye huriaro, suken sale huko, O veniat dich huko, O manarost huko, Gagumische huriaro, sanskirvache huko, Ikem pata huko, Mochamara huko, Bimaher are huriaro, So you can hear that it's very much the same story as pretty well all the versions that we know of the Trua sisters, only there are of course the variants and the glove and the ring and lots of other things. But basically the cruel sister is the cruel sister. I'll go on to the next song just in case I run out of time, and this one is from the Outer Hebrides and recorded by the fairly well-known collector Alexander Carmichael. Like Robert Burns, he was a tax collector with an interest in songs, and he was from the island of Lismore. Unlike some of the folk who made collections of songs, but more like Camilla Viola, he was more of the gentry class than the folk, than the Reverend Stewart, who, although well educated, was from the ordinary folk. But Carmichael made a huge collection and is published in the collection called Carmen Gadelica. He spent several years on the outer islands, in the island of Benbecula, which, and this is the sort of scenery then as now, and this is maybe a little bit older. This is from the 50s. So long after Carmichael was dead, people still brought home their peats. And this is the great storyteller and singer, Duncan MacDonald, who had songs that were, well, some of them took half an hour in the singing. There are recordings of them. So the fireside was the setting. And Carmichael describes visiting a man on the island of Benbecula. That's the island between North and South Uist. And he said, it was obtained in 1991 from Malcolm Macmillan, a crofter in Greemanish. Macmillan was then an old man. He'd heard this and many other poems when he was a boy from the old people, when he was evicted from Uist, emigrated to Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, and other parts of the Canadian Dominion, and also, as he says on page another, Australia. These old people took great quantities of traditional Gaelic lore with them and to their new homes, some of which still lingers amongst the descendants. Many original translated songs in the Highlands and Isles among these. Now, this is a song that he got from this Malcolm Macmillan. I haven't been able to find another version, and maybe there is one on those far-flung islands. And for those who are interested in his original notes from which the volumes were published, I don't envy the ones who wrote that down. So here's the version. It doesn't have a tune, but interestingly, it scans in Gaelic the same as it scans in English. That's quite unusual. And it does make me stop and wonder, I wonder which came first. Did he or somebody translate from Joseph and Mary, the one that we know in rhyme, that Joseph went Mary and walking one day to a garden of cherries they happened to stray. That's it scans in Gaelic, but here we have it. Joseph and Mary went to the numbering up, to a gathering, and the birds began chorusing. They were walking the way, they reached a thick wood where there was fruit, and it was red as a raspberry. And there was at a time when she was great, carrying the King of Grace. She took a desire for the fruit that was growing on the gracious slope, and spoke Mary to Joseph in a sweet, low voice, "Give me of the fruit, Joseph, that I may quench my desire." And Joseph spoke. The one on the right, the translation is translated from the Gaelic. So the one on the right doesn't scan as the version most of us know, which has the usual ballad meters of iambic pentameter. But this, and again, is lava Yosadima. I'll just a better read in English. And Joseph spoke to Mary, the hard pain in his breast. "I will give thee of the fruit, Mary, but who then is the father of thy burden?" It was then that the babe spoke from out of her womb. "Bend ye down, every beautiful bough, that my mother may quench her desire." And from the bough that was the highest to the bough that was the lowest, they all bent down to her knee, and Mary partook of the fruit and loved land in her loved land of prophecy. Then Joseph said to Mary, and he, full of heavy contrition, "It is carrying him thou art, the King of glory and of grace. Blessed art thou, Mary, among the women of all lands. Blessed art thou, Mary, among the women of all lands." I don't think anybody who is familiar with Child 54, the first miracle, would not recognize this as very much the Cherry Tree Carol that we still hear sung. So we're going to leave behind this photo of 979. So it's quite a long while after Carmichael recorded it in the next island. But this is the area which we're now going to go back to the Reverend Stewart. He came from this area, and here he is back again in Loch Aber, very different landscape. And he then refers to a walk that he was on one day. And these are the drove roads. He said, "I met an old man when I was out on a walk, and I invited to sit down and have a yarn." Stuart used to carry what we would just call a picnic, but it was just something to drink and some oatcakes, some cheese. So he saw the old man and he invited him to join. And he says, and in telling an old story about the wife of a farmer in our neighbouring district who seemed to be no better than she should be, he quoted a stanza of an old song, which he said his father used to sing with great spirit. It was from the good old smuggling days, more than 60 years ago. So having a pencil and a slip of paper, I took down a verse on the spot. And he quotes the verse, and he said, the verse reminded him of something he'd read, but he wasn't sure what it was. It rang a bell. And he was obviously a collector of songbooks, both in Gaelic and in English. So on returning home to the Mass, he said, I realised what it was. And so taking down Whitelaw's Book of Scottish Songs from the shelf, I found Our Good Man Came Home at Inn. And he quotes the entire text, adding, this highly humorous or ditty is preserved in the second edition of David Hurd's collection of 1776. And Johnson recovered the tune from the singing of an old hairdresser in Edinburgh, and he published the tune the first time in the 5th volume of his Scots Musical Museum. So it's quite interesting, I think, that Stuart, albeit a minister in Lochaber, had his hands on these kinds of books. In a way, I'm not surprised, because that even in my own day, my crofting and fishing grandfather had quite a collection of books. They didn't have Kennedy Fraser's Songs of the Hebrides because they were much too expensive and nobody read music. But they had other books, old books, and they were actually fairly well, they were very literate. And on the same shelf on my grandfather's, there was a concordance of the Bible in the Greek New Testament. So you could check that the minister had the right translation from Greek. So for all the fact they never had electricity and indeed hardly any plumbing, they still had books. So Reverend Stuart notes these points that fairly help us in our ballad studies today. And he then gives his full version. His version, I won't quote it in its entirety here, but well, I'll give you a quick literal translation. The good man came home, and he was not in the least expected. He saw a small boat, a yawl, on the beach, and he inquired what boat might be doing there. A boat, said she. Aye, a boat, said he. Oh, it's just a small wooden coggy milk pail that my mother gave to me. Through many scenes I've wandered, and the steps I've travelled far, but a pair of oars on a coggy never saw before. And on it goes. So I'm going to turn now, though, to a version that here we are. This is okay. We'll give you another verse of it. The good man came home, he was not the least expected, and he saw a horse at the door. He inquired about what the horse may be doing there. A horse, said she. Aye, a horse, said he. It's only a milking cow my mother gave to me. Through many a region I've wandered, and steps I've travelled far, but a saddle on a milking cow I never saw before. The good man came home, and he was in no wise expected, and he saw a horse at the door. He inquired what that horse might be doing there. A horse, said she. It's only a milk cow my mother gave to me. Many a place I wandered through, and step I travelled far, but a saddle on a milk cow never saw before. Now, I don't know what the tune that he knew was, but I heard a tune when I was in my teens, and I was at a ceilidh in the local village hall, and the whole audience joined in. But interestingly, for the one I heard, it was a macaronic song, and it was only the chorus that was in Gaelic. And Pete sent me a recording of a song that he picked up, which was very similar, and it had the same tune. Hamish Henderson recorded somebody, and this is the one Hamish recorded. I give you the steps here, I get it.
As I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the lobby a gentleman's coat the spy, saying, whose coat is this, boys, and whose can it be? It's only a blanket, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. With buttons on a blanket and I can do the real. I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the lobby a gent must stick a spy, saying, whose stick is this, me boys, and whose can it be? It's only a porridge stick, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me.
Oh, wait till I get that, pick it up for you where it left off.
As I came home, the things on a blanket and I can do the real. I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the lobby a gent must stick a spy, saying, whose stick is this, me boys, and whose can it be? It's only a porridge stick, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. But a silver mounted porridge stick and I can do the real. I came home the next night, home late came I. There in the bedroom, a gentleman a spy, saying, what man is this, me boys, and who can he be? It's only a baby, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. Oh, she make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. With whiskers on a baby, and not with the real. I came home the next night, him late came I. There in the lobby a gentleman's horse is by, saying, whose horse is this, my boys, and whose can it be? It's only a milking cow, my mammy said to me. Oh, she make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. She make him a cure me, Sergeant Romeo. But I saddle on a milking cow and I can do the real.
Maybe you can't make out all the words as clearly as they might be, not because he's not clear, it's the way he pronounces them. He's obviously, his main language is Gaelic because of the way he pronounces words like a gentleman's stick, stick it would be, and porridge stick, silver mounted porridge stick. But I think, although it's got variants and of the whole theme, it's undoubtedly a version of, I would say anyhow, a good man. So I'm going to come out of this. I'll stop sharing the screen and maybe just finish off with a comment from the Reverend Stewart. Here you have the old Scots songs first published, an old Scots song first published and heard, and here's a Gaelic version, almost identical. So he looks back on with glee on the picnic with the old man, but he wonders, he said, is this a Gaelic version derived from a broad Scots version, or is it the other way around, or are they all an original composition, or for that matter, did they all start off in English? Well, we don't know. I'll throw it out with you. And I think that he recognizes some great connections between the two. And I think there are more connections between Gaelic and Scots songs than is sometimes given credit, because in fact, some of the oldest bards went to Edinburgh. For example, Alexander MacDonald was at university in Edinburgh with Alan Ramsay, and they exchanged ideas and they wrote translations of each other's songs. So there was much more mixture than we find or we possibly give credit. Anyhow, I'll leave it with you, and you may disagree with all of my thoughts on three ballads that are Scottish Gaelic versions of child ballads.
Thank you, Margaret. Splendid as always. Lovely. Thank you. Anybody got any questions, please raise your hand. As always, I'll start with a question from me. The first one that you talked about, the sisters from Stuart, he gives quite a long sort of backstory to, and then the ballad starts. So he tells you the history. Does that exist as a folk tale?
Yes.
Or is that part of the ballad?
I think that's almost a pattern people discussed the songs, and they often had backstories. And if you didn't understand the backstory, you might not understand the song. And I'm not actually just talking about these songs, other songs as well, to have a story at the back of it. And a bit like the ballad, which is I think is characteristic of the ballad, is that it's told with great economy and often goes through from scene to scene. There's no change of scene or stage directions. You can get to start to finish of the ballad in a relatively short amount of scenes. But I heard Marjorie Kennedy Fraser did a recording, and in a way I think she threw people off the scent because she possibly made it into a song for the drawing room, and she called the song Sea Tangle, sang it in English, but really with none of the hint of the tragedy of the actual old song.
Thank you. We have got some questions. Brian's got his hand up. Thanks.
That was really enjoyable. Happy New Year, Margaret. Happy New Year to everybody.
You all. Yes.
Steve has, to some extent, anticipated my question, but I'd taken it in a slightly different direction. What struck me, looking particularly at that first ballad, The Two Sisters, compared with the Cherry Tree Carol, and even to some extent with Our Good Man, is that the Cherry Tree Carol could easily have been a translation of the familiar version of the kind that I'm familiar from England and from the USA. And Our Good Man, even though it had that incredible detail of the drunken husband arriving home by boat, it nonetheless went into the saddle on the milk cow verse, which I definitely recognise. Whereas The Two Sisters was all, as Steve said, it was the backstory, and it was all completely unfamiliar. So my question about that one was, did the Two Sisters ballad then progress into familiar stanzas about sometimes she sank, sometimes she swam, till she came to the Miller's Dam and so on?
No, it's got no Miller's Dam. She's on the sea and the rocks, and her hair she's tied down by the hair, and it doesn't have any of that. But I would agree with you. I did question. In fact, I did get so much, so was I questioning Alexander Carmichael's Cherry Tree Carol, that I thought it just was, especially as the Gaelic scanned in the rhythm of the Cherry Tree Carol. I thought this. I was happy to see it, and yet I had terrible suspicion. So I started to read more about Carmichael, and interestingly, he spent a few years in Cornwall. And I thought, I wonder if he took this home. He was given to tidying up songs and not saying what he did. His collection, Carmina Gadelica, it's a very worthwhile collection, 5 volumes of it, but there are quite a number of his pieces in perfect Gaelic presentation, which have raised eyebrows because people said, well, where did he get that? And they're more like, they resonate with, because by this time people are very familiar with the Folklore Society, they're very familiar with folklore motifs, and of course with Campbell of Isla's West Highland Tales. And so he draws strands, but doesn't say when he does this, which is quite frustrating. But I would say, Brian, that I would agree with you that one sounds like a translation. And indeed, Our Good Man, the fact that it's in both Gaelic and English, there's no, Hamish didn't write down the name of the singer, nor the place, but there is a singer who was recorded by Howard Glasser, a man called Peter Stewart in Ullapool. He was a traveller. And I have a feeling that's the man I heard singing, because they really did travel. I'm sure that's the man I heard singing in Lewis, because he had the voice stays with me. So again, the travellers picked up songs, and well, a good story is worth translating, and people wouldn't probably understand some of the motifs in the Our Good Man. So a boat, etc., a milking cow, yes. So yes, maybe we're looking at 2 different things. Translation.
Thank you, Mark. We've got to move on. We have other hands are raised. Joan Frankel.
Okay, this is more of a comment than a question, but I can't type fast enough to put it in the comments, which is that I've been going to a lot of these online singing sessions since COVID had started, and a lot of the people that run them don't want you to give a backstory. They'll shut you up if you're trying to give a backstory to a song that you feel needs one. And I'm so grateful to hear. It's so grateful to hear that a lot of old Scottish ballads also needed a backstory. That's
Yes,
it.
there's a book by Tom Burton, Some Ballads, folks. And he records women talking about before and after a ballad and talking about how the ballad, what the function was. And some of them have a backstory, and then a lot of them an after story, sort of along the lines of, well, she ought not to have done that, otherwise that wouldn't have happened to her, etc., that kind of stuff. But I think the backstory is different to telling the story of the ballad before you sing it. It's not the same. The backstory is something else that you need to know, and then you get the actual ballad or the actual song.
Exactly, and people who are running these online sessions don't seem to understand that. Sometimes you really need to give that information.
Yes.
People won't understand the ballad.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think you should tell them, Joan. you put your foot down and insist. Pete Shepherd's got his hand up. Thank you.
Yes, before I say something about the Well Good Man, it was interesting talking about the backstory of songs and so on. Quite often, Jeannie and other singers I've come across over the years, the ballad itself or the song itself doesn't tell the whole story.
Right.
It's only then that you realize there is more to it that the singer understands about the backstory. And I mean, or there's an extension, which something happens after the end of the song, which someone will know about. Someone will know, well, this didn't really happen quite like that because this happened afterwards, but it's not mentioned in the song. Or in the case of Jeannie, there was something that had happened before the ballad started, because it was her way of, perhaps, if she hadn't made it up, coming to an understanding of why the song started the way it did. In other words, there's something else that's already happened that isn't told in the song. The other thing I was going to say about the the song with the macaronic version of Our Good Man, which I recorded from Gaelic-speaking travellers in Fife in the 1960s. But I never, I saw your transcription of the Gaelic there, Shimid Ke Miumi, and so, which I've taken as being miles have I travelled, 10,000 miles or more. In other words, it's a direct translation of a version that's in the English language or in the Scots language, in the Scots.
Well, Shimaki, which that means many a step.
Yeah, many a step, right.
Yeah,
I was never quite sure what that was. So many a step have I travelled.
Yes, yeah. and I mean, for every mile, of course, there's many steps. Many a step I travelled. And the Shimaki Mahulmi. I've forgotten the next line. Anyway,
because you didn't write down that translation of that. You didn't write the English translation of that on the screen.
Well, in that case, I'll have to write your English translation. Send it back to me.
Because I've asked a few people about it, and I've never published the thing anywhere. Because I've occasionally sung it, and I've said to people, "Look, I'm going to sing the Gaelic such as I don't understand it. You can sing 1,000 miles I've travelled, 10,000 miles or more, but buttons on a blanket I never saw before," and so on. It scans beautifully. I mean, it's a
yes, it does. Well, there you are. Your Shimaki is many steps.
Yes, many steps. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa's got a hand up. You're muted, Lisa.
Yeah, Margaret. I was thinking about an article D.K. Wilgus wrote a long time ago, and he had come to studying Irish song after working on what he called blues ballads. And he said the interesting thing to him was that, the classic child ballads have a linear narrative logic, but it does that leaping and lingering thing, and it plunges you in the middle. It doesn't talk about motivation. And he said the interesting thing to him was that the Irish Gaelic ballads put you right in the middle at a different narrative logic, and it started from you being right in the middle and you reflected on it in a more circular way, which is why I was wondering if you thought this was why part of the singing practice was to pass along the backstory, which is part of the performance in lots of performances. I was wondering what you thought about that, especially for bilingual people. It gives you access to two completely different narrative logics. Thank you.
Yes, I think you're really quite onto something. My mother didn't sing any English, but she tried. She learned some English songs at school, but she never would have sung one at a concert. But she sang a lot of Gaelic songs. And she would tell the story. And we weren't allowed to sing the song until the story had to be, and she'd say, you have to get inside your song. And there was one from the north of Skye she would tell, and she would ask every time, she was nearly in tears every time she told that backstory. And she always ended with the same phrase, can you imagine how she felt, Margaret? Can you imagine how she felt? And then she'd sing this song after she got over the emotional side of it. But the song, and it was an actual story with progression and to the end, and it could have formed a piece by itself with no backstory. But the backstory changed, I think, pretty well everything about how we felt about the song. Does that make sense? And I think it resonates with what D.K. Wilgus was getting at, and what you've just summed up. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, everybody. I think nobody else has got their hand up, so a wind-up session for today, and a really good one it was too. Thank you to Margaret and Catherine. So don't forget to join us on the 8th of February at 3:30 if you want to come to the really scintillating AGM. And then even better will be 3 papers, but I can't remember what they are, but they're on the website. So thanks for coming, everyone, and we'll see you in February. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.